What's going on there, guys? Good morning, good afternoon to some out there. It's the Earthmaster here on this beautiful, cold and rainy Sunday, September 18th, 2022 date. It is about 10:24 a.m. California time. Got some rainfall and much cooler temperatures coming into the region right now here in Northern California, which is pretty awesome. I got my hot coffee in hand, and there's been quite a bit of earthquake activity ramping up overnight, folks. We've seen a much larger earthquake there in the Taiwan area. We'll check this out here in just a second. The latest quake on the globe, a 1.0 up in Alaska. Notice Yellowstone up there having a little activity, but there's much more happening there at Yellowstone than a 3.9. All right, let's go ahead and jump into the latest activity here from the USGS map showing the last 24 hours of earthquake activity around the flat scale model Earth. Notice the Taiwan area seeing quite a bit of uptick. Let's go ahead and zoom in here to the region. Now this is just the last 24 hours. Remember yesterday they had a 6.5 and quite a few other earthquakes in this area. We kind of looked at this last night in our nightly update. Excuse me. Change of weather. And looked at the potential for a possible larger earthquake in this area, and that's kind of what happened here. Got to keep an eye on this region as well. They had a 6.9 overnight, right? But there's always that possibility of this regional pressure that's just heavily increasing in this area to see a much larger quake. There has been some 8s in this area, 8.0 magnitude earthquakes, but for now, let's go ahead and look here at the region of Taiwan. Here's all the activity yesterday, late afternoon time frame, and a little bit overnight. This earthquake came in when I was sleeping. I think it was about 1 o'clock in the morning or so, somewhere around there. Maybe that's what woke me up. I don't know. I was up for a little bit, but I didn't make it into the computer room to check out the activity. Either way, 6.9 coming in overnight. Since then, we've seen quite a few more aftershocks, quite a few 5s, upper 5s, following all this movement. Let's go ahead and bring back the last 7 days of activity here and zoom in specifically to this area where we're looking at about 15 earthquakes or so over the last week's time frame, 4.5 and above. There is that 6.5 that struck here earlier yesterday morning. So it's not really showing up on the 24-hour map, but it's there. 6.5 and now 6.9. Again, as I mentioned last night, there was that likelihood of with all this activity crunching this Philippine plate here in this little fashion, that there was a possibility of a larger quake. And sure enough, that did happen. Again, this area is capable of some 8.0 magnitude earthquakes. I pulled up the last historical data over the last 100 years or so in the Taiwan area from the USGS, showing some earthquake activity in the 8.2 range back in 1920. So 100 years ago, a little bit over 100 years ago, that's when they seen an 8.2. Now, the specific area, this 8.2 just struck just offshore, but just to the northeast of our current increased activity of earthquake movement here. Notice right around the southeastern edge here of Taiwan, the 8-pointer struck just to the northeast, specifically around this area where we're seeing the current earthquake activity, a 7.8, and looks like a 7.3 back in 1951. Look at that little sequence there. They had a very similar event. Looks like they had on the same date a 7.3. And then only 3 minutes later, it had a 7.8. Ours is, at least in our time frame today, is spread out over 24 hours. That's when we've seen the larger quake. But got to remember the swarming that we're seeing today and over the past 24, 36 hours or so definitely could be pointing to something much bigger brewing in the area. So don't let your guard down if you're out there in this area of Taiwan. And right now, I'm thinking, with the incredible stress out here surrounding the Philippine plate, this whole area should be on alert. Got some swarming occurring up here to the north of the large-scale activity down south in Taiwan. See what we got here. A couple 5s kicking up here and some 4s as well. That's a sign of some heavily increasing plate stress out here along this area of the Philippine Plate, East China Sea. Remember, let me show you guys here this map. The Philippine Plate, the Filipino Plate, is being crunched, so to speak, with the stress from the Pacific Plate that's coming in at it from the east, right? The Pacific Plate's headed west, northwest. And then you got the huge Eurasia Plate coming in from the northwest, headed down to the southeast. You also got the Australia Plate moving up to the northeast area. That's all kind of crunching this area right now as far as earthquake activity goes. And we see it on the map. Yesterday there was just a broad scale. You could pretty much draw an arrow right here where the point would be as far as the general movement goes. So I would watch this area pretty closely around the Philippine Plate for possible larger scale activity. The latest quake here on the map looks like a 5.0 in that little cluster of swarming. So it sits off here about maybe about 400 miles or so to the northeast of Taiwan, and from the current earthquake activity that we're seeing. Just an overall sign there of some incredible stress in the region. Watch that pretty closely, folks. Again, here's a historical map. They get some big ones. 6.5 and a 6.9 is a lot smaller than these 8s and 7s that have taken place historically, and a lot of them over 100 years or so within the region. So the slip rate definitely accumulated. I got to get a drink of my coffee here real quick. Stand by for a second. All right, cold morning, hot coffee. I'm actually drinking a, I won't say the coffee shop name, but drinking a pumpkin spice latte with some whipped cream and some pumpkin spice on top of it. Pretty yummy. All right, let's back out of here a little bit. I want to cover another deal. Aside from Taiwan, Yellowstone is popping off like crazy. Overnight, they had a 3.9 earthquake kicking up here. It looks like they have it set around the Mammoth area. Let's go ahead and check out the latest thumbnail overview of Yellowstone National Park. Notice, check it out. Notice the activity really ramping up. Since it almost seems this activity ramped up since we seen the 6.9 there in Taiwan earlier, late last night. Things were just really kicking up here following that movement. So that definitely tells me right there that we need to be on guard on the west coast too. Inland pressure is quite great. It's one of those times where we're looking at seismic activity increasing on both sides of the plate, of the Pacific Plate and the adjacent plate over here, the Philippine Plate. And we don't see that too often. We see a lot of movement kicking up here, either mainly to the west or mainly to the east. And when one area goes quiet, the other one picks up in earthquake activity. It's been that way for a little while. I've noticed that trend. But today and yesterday, it's just been on both sides. So something is definitely under a lot of strain out there amongst the Pacific Plate and adjacent plates here. Okay, so Yellowstone, let's get back here. I didn't mean to get off topic too much there. Quite the swarm of activity. There is the 3.9 coming in just before the 1300 UTC time, right? 12:55 UTC time is where that 3.9 came in. Not for sure if they have reviewed it. It has been reviewed. And right now, I believe the USGS is only showing anything that may pop off in Yellowstone at 2.5 and above. So it's not showing all of this microquake activity. And there's a lot. Just looking over the last, 24 hours or so, there's probably upwards of 100 or more earthquakes in this area of Yellowstone. And that's a pretty good looking swarm kicking up right now. And as you can see here over the last couple hours, things have definitely been ongoing. The biggest one so far, again, a 3.9. The majority of these, I believe, are below the 2.0 threshold. But if you look, some of these other ones don't really show up across the park, right? Some of these microquakes. And that kind of tells me that they're probably under a 2.0 magnitude level, but there's a lot of them. That's definitely a pretty good swarm kicking up there at Yellowstone. And the 3.9, notice that it showed up broadly across this region of Yellowstone, all the way over here to Parker Peak. Showed up pretty nicely, including the S waves. Check out those S waves there, the little squiggly lines. That's from the 6.9 over there in Taiwan. The surface waves kicking up, travels around the globe. So yeah, a couple different areas watching right now. Incredible stress here along the inland area up against the North American craton, which include Yellowstone. And also, not to mention, let's go down here to the southern branch of the San Andreas Fault. Okay, this one I seen this one kind of coming in last night. Excuse me for a second, gotta grab some more coffee. Definitely a change in the weather, I believe, which I love. 64 earthquakes just off the southern branch here of the San Andreas Fault. That's a pretty good little swarm of movement on the Washburn Fault system, or Smoke Tree Wash Fault, right there. Smoke Tree Wash Fault. A little bit of info on that fault system there. There's a lot of textbook documentation on it and some study, and I can't find any historical data on it as far as earthquake activity goes. But there is, it looks like an initial preliminary fault slip from this article put back in 2018 of between 0.5 and 1.75 mm per year. Now that fault system is on the North American side of the plate boundary, and sometimes when we see these little fault systems inland just off the a major plate boundary, can kind of give these folks a good idea of the pressure and transfer and strain that's kind of being distributed and transferred through the complex system that exists down there in Southern California. And that's, again, that's just well inland by about, looks like a little bit less than 10 miles from the southern branch of the San Andreas Fault. That's the locked area where the 8.1 one day or bigger will hit the Southern California area. This area of the plate boundary, this fault system here, has not seen a full rupture, at least for the southern branch here, in over 300 years. So these little swarms are noteworthy and something to watch pretty closely, because not only do we have a little swarm here, but if you look down south on the extensional area of the San Andreas Fault, on the Brawley seismic zone, there's a little activity kicking up as well. So overall, Southern California definitely should be on watch right now. A lot of this activity kicking up overnight, nothing within the last hour, but as you can see there, 1533, a 2.6 was the last earthquake there in that swarm, and that's probably about 2 hours ago or so. But the magnitudes are kind of getting up there. We had a 3.5 in that swarm. We had a 3.3 in that swarm as well. See how the magnitudes are kind of increasing as well. These are not just little microquakes anymore. They're getting a little bit bigger on the magnitude. So I am going to definitely issue a earthquake watch here for the SoCal area until we figure out what's going on with this all this earthquake activity on both sides of the plate. Most of the time, probably 90% of the time, we see this on one side or the other, not on both like this. So something is brewing big time in the area. Got to watch that pretty closely. The rest of Southern California, aside from these two spots, and I'm not minimizing that potential for for some serious hazardous activity there on the San Andreas Fault. It's long overdue. What's going to trigger it? Who knows? Could it be this swarm? Here in an hour, could we see the 8.1 hit? You never know. We don't know that. How much strain's built up? Quite a bit. It is wound as tight as it can be here in the southern end of the San Andreas Fault. Some further activity over here to the west on the Pacific side of the plate boundary near the Lake Henshaw area. That's off the Elsinore Fault system. And some very typical movement here along the San Jacinto fault zone, but it's these little areas off of the San Andreas fault and the extensional fault systems here that we got to watch and pay attention to. Further up north, some spotty activity. Not super active here in Northern California or around the Bay Area for that matter. Just a couple small microquakes. Up here along the Cascadia, this one coming in late afternoon time frame yesterday at 3.4, right off the Cascadia megathrust area, the subduction zone at 19 kilometers deep. Up into the Pacific Northwest, relatively quiet as well. Looks like a 1.2 and a couple other smaller quakes there. We'll check out the Mount St. Helens earthquake map here in a little bit so we can see what seismic activity looks like there up in Washington. But the rest of the country here, pretty quiet. Not a whole lot popping up here from the USGS, showing nothing across the rest of the country. A couple spotty earthquakes there in Texas from yesterday. Puerto Rico, it's a movement out here around the Puerto Rico Trench. Once again, we have been watching this area here as well over the last week or so. Seen quite a bit of movement up here around the Puerto Rico Trench area. This is another area that could see a pretty damaging earthquake here in the near future. But these swarms, they come and go up here, so it's not anything too much to worry about. But I do kind of open my eyes when I see that swarming occurring right there on the trench area. Today, a little bit of activity north there as well, towards the Puerto Rico Trench, and the typical movement here around the southwestern edge of Puerto Rico. South America, awfully quiet. Out there in the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, got a 4.9. This one coming in yesterday. It's a movement up here. See when this came in. It looks like we had one 4.5 in the Albania area earlier this morning time frame. These other two quakes in the Cyprus and the Greece area, Crete, are from yesterday. So movement up around the Himalayas in the India area as well. This one coming in just a couple hours ago, 4.1. Myanmar area, seen some movement too with a 4.2. That one coming in yesterday at 23, 33, 30 seconds. Ooh, wow, lots of threes in there, my number. So, a lot of activity kicking up here, folks. When we look at these plate boundaries here and the general direction of the plate movement, you know, of course, there's always some separate fault systems and whatnot that go in different directions compared to the general plate movement as a whole. But you got to look at this here and kind of figure out where potential could be at. Yes, we have a lot of earthquake activity here around the Taiwan area, which is still showing quite a bit of pressure. But at the same time, there's a quiet zone up here that we haven't seen any large-scale activity on in quite a while, and that's the Kuril-Kamchatka Trench up here. Notice the subduction zone. That itself is under quite a bit of strain as well. You got direction from the north, from this area, from the Pacific Plate, the Eurasia Plate, all putting a lot of strain in this region. Remember last week we had some movement here around the Java Trench, the 7-pointer in Papua New Guinea. All that's kind of crunching up here to the north. After all this activity happened, we've seen further movement northward along the Philippine Plate. But I still think this area right here along the Kuril-Kamchatka Trench, Japan Trench area, could be very primed for a large quake, possibly be above a 7-pointer. It's just been awfully quiet far as any large-scale activity goes in this region. And the slip rate, the accumulated slip rate here is incredibly high. So got to watch that pretty closely. I think that's kind of what we're looking at potentially. And we'll see how that plays out in the hours and days ahead. Till then, we'll just be on guard and be prepared. Let's see what else we got. Alaska. Let's see what we got. A little bit of movement up north. Anchorage area and Denali. This is all very typical movement. I don't see any major swarms around the volcanoes. The Big Island of Hawaii, southeastern portion around Pahala, very typical there for the swarming. A little bit of activity up around Mauna Loa and outside of the Mauna Kea area. Got a 2.2 overnight time frame. No unusual activity to note, and no major changes across any of the volcanoes. I like that coffee. It's got a little bit of kick to it. The Cascades, Sierra Nevada, Southern Cal, all quiet for now. Yellowstone, quiet for now, as far as any unrest goes. And just typical movement or typical watches and advisories up here across numerous Aleutian volcanoes. Kilauea still on its watch level because it still is erupting. Nothing new out the Tau volcano there around the Manua Islands, American Samoa, but we will check it out and see what we got for the seismic activity. And as you notice here, it's died off a lot. In the weeks past, we had seen quite a few earthquakes here on the map. This is recorded seismograph here over the last 24 hours. And notice there's only maybe a little, maybe 1 or 2, 3 or 4, some very, very small ones. But this station also did pick up the S waves here from the activity in Taiwan overnight. Those wavy lines traveling through the earth and around the globe, or around the map, flat scale map, however you want to look at it. But earthquake activity there at the Tau volcano, it's dying off pretty drastically. All right, let's see. Yeah, there's that 3.9. Again, Yellowstone swarming like crazy. When we see Yellowstone swarming, and the West Coast kind of swarming down there in Southern Cal, it's a good sign of some incredible pressure out here along the North American plate. And I don't think it's I don't think we're over yet today, folks. I don't believe it. Let's see here. Let's get out of here and go to the Solar Ham. Oh man, Solar Ham site. Noticing some activity kicking up here on the DRAP map. Looks like maybe a little flaring activity on the C threshold. Not for sure exactly where that's coming from. Probably from one of these far side sunspots here on the western limb. We do have a new developing sunspot, it looks like here. That's kind of piquing my interest, so to speak. Can't really see it on the magnetic fields yet, but it is way over there on the eastern limb. These current sunspots, former 3088 is not looking all that active. It is still a sunspot, but it's not doing quite what it did last time it was in that position a couple weeks ago. It's now newly named sunspot 3102. And these other sunspots here don't really pose any type of major hazard as far as solar flare activity goes. But we'll watch this coming one around the bend. It's just way over here. Got a couple days before that thing may rotate into view. Solar weather has been active, but not active like we've seen a week or so ago when we had all those M flares. And we're not under a whole lot of strain there on the magnetosphere. Things are pretty green across the board. There's no major pressure or coronal holes here on the Earth. We're facing the Earth. Yeah, I just hope there's no coronal hole here on the Earth. But the charged solar particles there from the solar wind, it's just very minimal. I'm pretty certain that we're way down there. Here's the current real-time solar wind stream. Got a little bit of speed kicking up here around the 500 range, but not drastically. It's not too amplified. Density is kind of neutral as well. Not for certain where this wind stream is coming from. Let's see if these guys have updated anything. They're just talking about the sunspot that I'm kind of viewing. This is actually a pretty good image. Forgot to check this one. Look at that sunspot on the way over there on the eastern limb. Again, we're only seeing up to this line as far as the Earth view goes. But it's over there, and I'm kind of anxious to see if that thing's going to pop up and continue to stay active. It looks like that was former sunspot 3089. That's crazy. But no mention of the coronal hole or solar wind stream that's kind of kicking up right now. I'm guessing it's possible it could be from... Let's see, what do we got? This one right here is just barely facing. It's not even... This one won't be geo-effective here until a couple days. This is the latest imagery. So it shouldn't be coming from there. Not for sure exactly where that heightened solar wind's coming from, but it's there a little bit. All right, let's see. What else do we have here, folks? I'm going to include... Where'd that article go? I'm going to include this little article here from the Southern California Earthquake Center. A pretty cool site, right, for monitoring volcanoes and also investigating these fault systems that maybe not too many people hear about. I don't, it's Smoke Tree Wash Fault. I haven't mentioned that in quite a while, but it is pretty important when it comes to studying the southern branch of the San Andreas Fault and the stress and strain that kind of gets transferred and moved from that plate boundary over to the east a little bit onto this separate fault system. There's a couple different fault systems over there that definitely could be a telltale sign of the amount of strain that's really built up there along the southern end of the San Andreas Fault. So I'll include that there as a link if you guys want to read something. There's also some other articles in here that is worth reading. All right, what else we got? I think that's about it for now. A real quick look at the current data. Nothing popping up here in the red as far as the larger quakes go. Southern California right now, low activity down there. That's a little microquake. But just be prepared, folks. Make sure you have an earthquake plan. And thoughts going out to the folks there around Taiwan. Definitely been a lot of shaking going on out there. And there's definitely a lot of pressure still within the region of the Philippine Plate, which includes Taiwan here on the western side. This whole area should definitely be on the watch here for some further large-scale activity. But we can't leave out the Kuril-Kamchatka Trench. Watch that pretty closely. All right, guys, have a good day. I'm going to go outside and stand in the rain. Yes, that's what I like to do. I'm not crazy. It's been a while since we've had some rain here in California. So I'm going to enjoy every sprinkle. We'll catch you guys a little bit later on this evening, folks, unless something drastic or major happens. I do have quite a few live seismograph stations keyed up right now on the live stream, monitoring data around the globe. So if we see something major on there, we'll know about it well before a notification gets out on the USGS or the EMSC model. All right, guys, take care. We'll see you folks a little bit later tonight. Peace out.